Chapter 1. The sun who became the roar before the world learned the comfort of calendars before cities learned to trust walls. Power ruled the cosmos the way a storm rules a coastline. It arrived without permission. It changed everything. It left wreckage behind and called it fate. Kronos ruled then. He did not rule with law. He ruled with fear that pretended to be order. A prophecy followed him like a shadow glued to his spine. One of his children would overthrow him the way he overthrew his own father. Kronos heard that warning and made a decision that was not strategy but panic. He would swallow the future. Hades went first into that living prison, then the others. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, and then Poseidon. Poseidon was born with the sea already in his blood, though the sea was not yet his. He arrived as raw force, as a presence too large for a cradle. But Kronos did not care what kind of child he was. Kronos only cared that the child existed. So Kronos swallowed him. The myths often speak of being swallowed, as if it is a moment, a single act, a quick cruelty. But for the swallowed, it is an age. Inside Kronos, Poseidon did not grow under sunlight. He grew under pressure. He did not learn language from birds and wind. He learned it from silence and suffocation. He learned what it means to be contained, and that lesson carved a permanent wound into him. Some gods grow into wisdom. Poseidon grew into refusal. Refusal to be contained. Refusal to be silenced. Refusal to be treated like a thing that can be hidden. In that darkness, his temper formed like a storm assembling itself from invisible heat. It was not only anger at Kronos. It was anger at the principle behind Kronos. The belief that fear gives you the right to destroy your own blood. Poseidon learned something else there too. He learned that power is not always the one who strikes. Sometimes power is the one who holds. Sometimes the most terrifying strength is the hand around your throat that never has to squeeze to remind you it can. That is what Kronos was. And Poseidon swore, in the way gods swear without words, that he would never be held again. Then Zeus was born outside the prison, hidden by Rhea, raised in secrecy. Zeus grew with air in his lungs and ambition in his eyes. He learned persuasion, alliance, timing. He learned how to turn resentment into an army. Poseidon did not witness Zeus growing. He felt it, faintly at first, like distant thunder through the walls of a cave. A presence moving above. A promise moving closer. And then the prison convulsed. Kronos was forced to vomit the children he swallowed. The old king retched up the future he tried to erase. The siblings emerged into the open world like weapons pulled from a wound. Poseidon came up with the taste of captivity still in his mouth. The sky hit him like a slap. The vastness, the brightness, the wind, the space that had existed above him the whole time without his consent. Some would fall to their knees and worship the freedom. Poseidon did not kneel. He inhaled, and the air burned, and he smiled with a kind of fury that looked like joy, because freedom did not feel gentle. Freedom felt like permission to strike back. The Titan War began quickly, not because the younger gods were impatient, but because the old order does not surrender to the new politely. The Titans had ruled for ages. They were the bones of the world's earliest architecture. They did not step aside because a prophecy demanded it. So the cosmos became a battlefield. Zeus stood at the center of the rebellion with a king's intensity, turning chaos into strategy. Hades moved with a cold precision, already thinking about prisons and borders. Poseidon was different. Poseidon did not want a throne yet. He wanted the fight. He wanted the sound of the old world breaking. In the Titanomachy, Poseidon fought like a force released from a cage. He did not simply hit enemies. He changed terrain. He shattered certainty. He made the ground unreliable and the air dangerous. Wherever he moved, stability died. This is not poetry. This is the nature of his being. Poseidon is not the god of calm seas. He is the god of the sea's truth. The truth that water is beautiful and merciless. The truth that one moment it carries ships, and the next it swallows them. The truth that it never apologizes. The war demanded weapons worthy of gods. The Cyclopes were freed, and they forged gifts for the brothers. Zeus received thunder and lightning, authority made visible. Hades received a helm that could hide him from sight, strategy made tangible. Poseidon received the Trident, not merely a spear, a symbol of dominion over the shifting world, a key to the deep, a claim pressed into metal, declaring that the sea would not remain wild forever. It would be rule. When Poseidon held it, the war tilted. The Trident did not only kill, it commanded. It split thought. It summoned. It could crack stone as if stone was only hardened foam. It could call waves as if the ocean was an animal that recognized its master. But Poseidon did not become calm with power. Power amplified him. If Zeus's lightning made Zeus more certain, Poseidon's trident made Poseidon more relentless. He began to fight not only to win, but to prove something to the universe. That he could never be swallowed again. That no one could ever force him into silence. In the middle years of the war, the Titans learned to fear more than Zeus's thunder. They learned to fear unpredictability. Zeus' strikes were terrifying because they were decisive. Poseidon's strikes were terrifying because they were everywhere. He attacked like weather. He attacked like flood. He attacked like the sudden collapse of a cliff into the sea. There was no safe distance from him. If you were on the battlefield, you were in his reach. And yet, even Poseidon's fury had a purpose beneath it. He was not fighting only for revenge. He was fighting to reshape the cosmos into a world where the future could not be swallowed by a tyrant's fear. It is easy to paint Poseidon as merely violent. But violence was his language because violence was what freed him. He understood the world through impact. That is a flaw, yes. It is also why he was indispensable. When the Titans finally fell, when Kronos was defeated, when the old rulers were chained and cast into Tartarus, the cosmos exhaled. There was a silence after the war that felt like a new kind of emptiness. The brothers stood in the aftermath as victors, but victory creates its own tension. Now there was a world to divide. Now there were realms to govern. Now there were borders to draw between powers that had fought as one but would rule as three. Zeus looked upward. He always looked upward. He wanted the sky, the visible crown, the throne no one could ignore. Hades looked downward. He wanted the underworld, the place of endings, the realm that would keep order beneath all order. Poseidon looked outward. He looked to the horizon, to the edges, to the moving, living chaos that touched every shore. He wanted the sea, not because it was an easy prize, but because it matched him. The sea is never truly at rest. Neither is Poseidon. So the cosmos was divided. Zeus took the sky. Hades took the underworld. Poseidon took the sea. And the moment Poseidon claimed his realm, the ocean changed. It became not only water, but territory. Not only vastness, but kingdom. Not only mystery, but a seat of power with a ruler whose temper could turn a calm day into disaster. Poseidon stood at the boundary of his new domain and felt something he had never felt inside Kronos. Ownership die. Not ownership as greed. Ownership as release. The ocean was too large to be swallowed, too wide to be contained, too deep to be held in anyone's throat. The sea was the perfect answer to his trauma, and so he became its god. But a god does not only receive a realm. A god becomes responsible for it. And responsibility for a spirit like Poseidon is a dangerous thing. It can become protection. It can also become entitlement. Poseidon's story does not begin in romance. It begins in pressure, war, and a hunger for freedom that never learned how to soften. That hunger would shape everything that came after. His love, his pride, his cruelty, his sudden mercies, his endless rivalries, and the storms he would send into human history like signatures written in salt. Chapter 2. The King of Salt. The maker of quakes. The first lesson Poseidon learned as ruler was this: a realm does not obey you because you claim it. A realm obeys you when it recognizes you. The sea is not like the sky. The sky can be commanded by lightning, and lightning makes authority visible. The underworld can be governed by law, and law makes authority permanent. But the sea is alive in its own way. It is mood. It is motion. It is the appetite of the earth. To rule the sea, Poseidon could not simply hold a trident. He had to become the sea's rhythm. So he did. He walked the coasts of the young world as if he was measuring it. He tasted the salt air and felt his own pulse echo in the waves. He learned the currents as if they were veins. He listened to the groaning of the ocean floor and understood that beneath the water was another form of power that belonged to him as well. The earth shakes. The ancients knew this. They felt it in sudden, terrifying moments when the ground moved like a living beast. They feared it because it was not a storm you could see coming. It arrived without warning and punished without explanation. They called Poseidon an earth shaker. This was not a poetic nickname. It was an acknowledgement of jurisdiction. Poseidon was not only a sea god. He was a god of the boundary where land and sea wrestle, the force that can crack stone and swallow cities. The trident that commands waves could also strike the earth's crust and make mountains tremble. If Zeus ruled the sky and all that falls from it, Poseidon ruled the border where stability pretends it is safe. And that border is always a lie. This is why Poseidon's worship was never simple. People prayed to him for safe voyages, yes. They offered sacrifices before launching ships. They begged him to keep storms away. They honored him at harbors, at docks, at coastal temples where salt air made every candle flame tremble. But they also feared him with a deeper dread. Because Poseidon does not only protect sailors, he creates shipwrecks. And to the mortal mind, a god who can both save and destroy is more frightening than a god who only destroys. A god of pure destruction is predictable. A god of mixed moods is not. Poseidon learned quickly that unpredictability is a throne. He made sea creatures obey. He named currents like generals. He raised waves to punish arrogance and lowered them to reward humility. He did not do this gently. He was not built for gentle rulership. His realm taught him a new kind of pride. Not the pride of standing above others. The pride of being essential. Every shore touches the sea. Every empire needs water. Every trade route is a thread across his territory. Even the sky's storms eventually meet the ocean. Poseidon's influence was everywhere. And that influence fed the part of him that was always hungry. But the sea was not the only thing that made him powerful. Poseidon was also a builder. This surprises people because they only remember his wrath. Yet in the myths, Poseidon is the one who shapes coastlines. He raises islands. He creates springs from the ground with the strike of his trident. He builds walls and fortifications. He works with stone as if stone is just another form of water waiting to be moved. This is one of his contradictions. Water is fluid. Poseidon is fluid. Yet he is also the god who can create permanence in stone. He can make a city stronger. He can make a fortress rise. He can give humans a gift that lasts longer than their own lives. And this is where his rivalry begins to sharpen. Because when a god can build, he expects gratitude. Poseidon did not tolerate being dismissed. The first great proof of this is not a love story. It is a competition. Athens, a city in need of patronage, a city becoming important, a city whose future would echo through human history. A patron god would define its character. To win a city is to win a permanent stream of worship, offerings, and cultural devotion. Poseidon wanted that. He arrived at the contest with the confidence of a god who believed his gifts were undeniable. He struck the ground with his trident and produced a spring. In some tellings it was a salt-water spring. In others it was a violent surge, a sign of raw power. The message was clear, either way. I can give you water. I can give you the sea. I can give you dominance. Athena offered something different. She offered the olive tree, a gift of peace and endurance. Food, oil, wood, a resource that could sustain a city through decades, not only through a season. A gift that matched the kind of civilization Athens would become. The city chose Athenia. Poseidon lost. And Poseidon did not accept losing with grace. He punished the land with flooding, or drought, or a curse that echoed in stories. The details vary, but the emotion remains consistent. Rejection became rage. This is one of Poseidon's great flaws, and it appears again and again. He does not handle humiliation well, because humiliation reminds him of Kronos. Humiliation reminds him of being contained and disregarded. Humiliation reminds him of having no control. So when Poseidon loses, he does not simply withdraw. He strikes. This pattern shapes his relationships with gods and mortals alike. He built walls with Apollo for King Laomedon of Troy, a task that should have been honored with payment and respect. The king refused to pay. The king treated the gods like laborers, like tools. Poseidon responded with wrath, sending a sea monster against Troy. He does not forgive being used. He does not forgive being cheated. He does not forgive being laughed at. And yet, the same God who punishes can also bless. This is why sailors still prayed to him. They understood something about Poseidon that philosophers often miss. A god of the sea is not meant to be kind. A god of the sea is meant to be real. Now, Poseidon's role among the Olympians was complicated. Zeus was king, and Poseidon accepted that most of the time. But acceptance is not agreement. Poseidon did not see Zeus as superior in essence. He saw Zeus as the one who held the visible crown. Poseidon held the sea, and the sea is older than most crowns. Hades held the underworld, and Hades ruled with permanence. Poseidon ruled with motion. This difference created tension in how each brother expressed authority. Zeus made decrees. Poseidon made demonstrations. Hades made boundaries. Poseidon, being Poseidon, did not stay neatly inside his boundary. Seas touch everything. Rivers run inland. Storms cross skies. Tectonic plates move beneath land. His power naturally intrudes. And Poseidon treated that intrusion like a right. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was arrogance. This arrogance led to conflict with Zeus at least once in the mythic memory. There is a story where Poseidon, Hera, and Athena conspire against Zeus. They bind him, attempting to restrain his rule, perhaps as a protest against his tyranny, perhaps as a grasp for their own power. The details are ancient and shifting, but the betrayal is clear. Poseidon tried to overthrow Zeus, and that attempt failed. The sea god learned that thunder has allies. Zeus's authority, once established, became hard to crack. Zeus was freed, and punishment followed. Poseidon was humiliated again, forced into labor, compelled to build walls for mortals like a servant. This humiliation carved the wound deeper, because to Poseidon being forced to serve was the closest thing to being swallowed without being swallowed, and the gods never forgot it. Neither did Poseidon. He returned to his realm with a sharper sense of pride and a sharper sense of grievance. He became more protective of his status, more sensitive to disrespect, more likely to lash out when he felt ignored. But he was also older now. Older than the war, older than the rebellion, older than his first assumption that victory would solve the wound inside him. Victory did not solve it. Power did not solve it. The sea itself did not solve it. The wound remained, and Poseidon tried to fill it with something else. Love. Or what gods call love when desire and dominance blur. Poseidon's romantic life is vast, tangled, and often violent. He is one of the most prolific lovers in myth, and that is not a compliment. It is a record of appetite. Some of his unions are tender as a storm can be when it pauses. Many are not. Poseidon desired. Poseidon pursued. Poseidon took. Poseidon fathered children who became heroes, kings, monsters, and tragedies. He did not build a family the way mortals build families. He built a legacy the way the sea builds coastlines, by relentless shaping. And this is where his story becomes darker. Because a god who cannot tolerate rejection will inevitably become a god who crosses lines. Poseidon did not always ask. Poseidon did not always respect boundaries. Poseidon, whose own deepest trauma was being contained against his will, often became the one who contained others. That contradiction is part of his mythic truth, and it is what makes him both fascinating and terrifying. As his dominion solidified, the sea god began to write himself into human history, not only through storms and quakes but through bloodlines, through offspring who carried his force into the mortal world. But the first and greatest complication of his romantic life was not a mortal. It was his wife, Amphitrite, a sea goddess, one of the Nereids, beautiful and elusive, not easily conquered. Poseidon desired her, and in many tellings she fled, resisting the match. Poseidon sent messengers to find her. A dolphin is often the one who persuades her, and for that service Poseidon places the dolphin among the stars. This detail matters because it reveals something. Poseidon can be persuaded to use diplomacy, but usually only when he wants something badly enough to attempt patience. Amphitrite becomes queen of the sea beside him. Their union produces Trident in many tellings, a being of sea and sound, whose conch shell can calm waves or summon them. A royal household of the deep. Yet Poseidon, even with a queen, does not become faithful. The ocean does not belong to one current. Neither does Poseidon. His affairs continue, his desires spilling beyond the palace of coral and gold. He fathers Theseus, a hero king. He fathers Polyphemus, the Cyclops who will one day become a nightmare for Odysseus. He fathers Pegasus in some traditions through Medusa, an act born from violence that becomes a symbol of beauty and speed. He fathers monsters and miracles with the same indifferent fertility. Because to Poseidon, creating life is not always tenderness. Sometimes it is conquest. Sometimes it is consequence. The sea does not only nourish, it also overwhelms. Poseidon is the sea. And so his story grows, wave after wave, leaving behind a coastline of legends, each one shaped by his pride, his appetite, his wrath, and his occasional startling mercy. Chapter 3. The God who desired everything, and the price of being untamed. Poseidon's palace is often described as a wonder of the deep. Pillars of coral, floors of pearl, light that moves like living gold through water, sea creatures that circle the halls like silent guards, a throne that does not rest on stone but on pressure, the heavy certainty of the ocean itself. But a palace, even under miles of water, does not tame a god. Poseidon was not made to be contained by architecture. He was made to move. So even as he ruled, he wandered. He crossed coasts. He rose from surf like a sudden omen. He appeared in storms that shattered fleets, and he appeared in calm seas that saved fishermen who never knew why they survived. Mortals feared him, but they also depended on him. They learned rituals. They learned offerings. Bulls sacrificed at the shoreline, their blood mixing with salt. Prayers spoken before voyages, because the sea does not care about your courage. It cares about your luck, and luck can be negotiated only through divine mood. Poseidon's mood became the most important currency of sailors, and Poseidon knew it. That knowledge fed his pride, and pride fed his appetite. When we speak about Poseidon's love stories, we have to speak with honesty. He was not a romantic in the human sense. He was a force that desired, and desire, when it belongs to a god, does not always look like longing. It looks like possession. It looks like pursuit. It looks like power. Amphitrite was his queen, and her presence gave his realm a kind of legitimacy, a royal face for the sea's endless movement. But Poseidon's nature did not become loyal simply because he married. The sea does not stop being the sea because someone crowns it. Poseidon loved as he ruled. He spread himself across the world. He touched shores and left consequences behind. He left children in his wake like pearls and like wreckage, sometimes both in the same story. Some of his lovers were goddesses and nymphs. Some were mortal women caught in the orbit of divine attention. Some were pursued with persuasion. Others were pursued with violence. This is the part of Poseidon's myth that many storytellers soften or avoid. But if you want the true dramatic weight of his character, you cannot avoid it. Poseidon is not merely a hero god of sailors. He is also one of the gods who demonstrates brutally how dangerous it is when power becomes appetite. Consider Medusa. In some later traditions, Medusa is a priestess of Athena, and Poseidon's desire for her becomes a violation committed in a sacred space. The exact details vary across sources and ages, but the theme is clear. A boundary was crossed, and the punishment, in many versions, does not fall primarily on Poseidon. It falls on Medusa. She becomes monstrous, her gaze turning men to stone, her hair becoming snakes. Poseidon's role remains, and from the wreckage of that story, something strange is born. Pegasus, beauty and speed rising from violence, like a miracle born from a wound. This is the paradox of Poseidon's legacy. He creates wonder and horror from the same impulse. Now, consider Demeter. In some traditions, Poseidon desires Demeter, his own sister, and she flees, transforming herself into a mare to escape him. Poseidon transforms into a stallion and pursues her anyway. From that union comes the divine horse Arion, and sometimes a daughter with secret names. Again, the theme remains. Transformation does not always protect you from a god who refuses to accept no date. Poseidon's myth is full of pursuit. He is the wave that keeps coming, no matter how many times the shore tries to retreat. This is why he is feared even by those who worship him, because he is not a god of polite boundaries. He is a god of the boundary itself, the place where one thing becomes another through force. But Poseidon's love life is not only predation. There are stories of tenderness too, brief moments where the sea's violence quiets into something almost gentle. With Amphitrite, there is at least a sense of partnership, a shared rule of the deep. Amphitrite is not merely decoration. She is a sea goddess of her own authority. The myths that show her as distant or passive often come from mortal assumptions, not from divine reality. In many traditions, she remains a stabilizing presence in Poseidon's household, an anchor in a realm that could otherwise become pure chaos. But even anchors can be dragged by storms, and Poseidon was a storm. His children became the clearest proof of his nature. Theseus, a hero and king, carries Poseidon's force in his blood in some traditions, even if other traditions emphasize Aegeus as father. Theseus is bold, proud, and sometimes ruthless. He achieves greatness. He also leaves heartbreak behind. That is a Poseidon pattern. Victory mixed with damage. Polyphemus, the Cyclops, carries Poseidon's cruelty and his raw physical power. A being who lives without social law, who treats strangers as meat. When Odysseus blinds him, it is not only a personal injury. It is an insult to Poseidon's pride, and Poseidon, when insulted, does not forget. That is his most consistent trait. He may be distracted. He may pursue new desires. He may move like weather. But when he is wounded by disrespect, he becomes permanent. This is another contradiction. The sea looks fluid, but its grudges can be stone. Poseidon's rivalry with other gods also grew through these years. He competed with Athena not only for Athens, but for influence. He competed with Apollo in various myths, sometimes as allies, sometimes as rivals. He competed with Zeus, not always openly, but in the quiet way brothers compete when one wears the visible crown. Poseidon was powerful enough to challenge Zeus, but not secure enough to accept Zeus's superiority without resentment. That insecurity is not weakness. It is a wound. And wounded power is often more dangerous than stable power, because wounded power needs constant proof. Poseidon needed proof. Proof that he mattered. Proof that he was respected. Proof that he was not the swallowed child anymore. This is why he reacted so intensely to insults. This is why he punished cities that rejected him. This is why he favored those who acknowledged him. This is why he became, in the mortal imagination, one of the most unpredictable gods. Nowhere is this unpredictability more dramatic than in his role with storms. When Poseidon is calm, the sea becomes a mirror. Ships glide. Fishermen return with nets heavy. Harbors fill with the sound of commerce and laughter. Families survive. When Poseidon is angered, the sea becomes a mouth. Ships vanish. Coasts break. Villages are torn away as if they were drawn in sand. The ocean does not only kill people, it erases evidence that they existed. That is the terror of Poseidon. Zeus kills with lightning. It is sudden, visible, almost clean. Poseidon kills with drowning. It is slow, suffocating, intimate. It forces the body to fight for air while the sea fills every gap. That kind of death leaves a deeper fear in the human mind. So mortals tried harder to please Poseidon than to love him. They built temples. They held festivals. They made offerings. They created games, like the Isthmian Games, that honored him with athletic proof and communal attention. And Poseidon accepted all of it as his due. But even as he became revered, his hunger did not shrink. Because hunger was never about lack. It was about identity. Poseidon did not know who he was without motion, without conquest, without being the one who arrives. This is why the next phase of his story becomes inevitable. A man will appear who embodies everything Poseidon hates. A mortal who is clever enough to insult gods and survive. A mortal who values mind over brute force. A mortal who will cross Poseidon's waters again and again and refuse to bow properly. That man is Odysseus. And Poseidon will turn that conflict into one of the most famous divine vendettas in myth. Not because Odysseus is the greatest hero, but because Odysseus injures Poseidon where Poseidon is most sensitive. His pride. Chapter 4. The Grudge That Became a Sea, and the Long Suffering of Odysseus. There are many ways to anger a god. You can refuse sacrifice. You can insult a temple. You can deny a vow. You can act as if the divine is a rumor. But the fastest way to anger Poseidon is to humiliate what belongs to him. Because Poseidon's sense of ownership is not only territorial, it is personal. His children are not merely offspring. They are extensions of his pride. They are proof that his power reaches into the mortal world. When they are harmed, Poseidon does not experience it like a distant parent. He experiences it like an attack on his name. Polyphemus was one of those children. A cyclops, brutal and isolated, living in a cave like a creature that never learned human law. He was not kind. He was not civilized. He was not fair. But he was Poseidon's. And Odysseus entered Polyphemus' world with the dangerous confidence of a man who believed intelligence could solve anything. Odysseus was clever, and cleverness is seductive. It makes a man feel chosen by fate. It makes him believe the gods admire him for being sharp. But gods do not always admire cleverness. Poseidon especially does not admire it when cleverness looks like mockery. Odysseus and his men entered the cave. They took food. They waited. They assumed hospitality would protect them, because hospitality was one of the sacred laws of the world. Polyphemus did not care. He trapped them. He ate men like animals eat prey. He treated their screams like background noise. He embodied the older, crueler parts of the world that civilization tries to pretend it has erased. Odysseus did not defeat him with strength. He defeated him with deception. He offered wine. He used the Cyclops' ignorance. He called himself nobody. He blinded Polyphemus with a sharpened stake. He escaped beneath sheep. He turned a monster's brutality into a puzzle, and he solved it. This would have been a perfect heroic triumph if Odysseus had known when to leave quietly. But Odysseus, like most heroes, carried pride that could not resist applause, even if the only audience was the sea. As his ship pulled away, he shouted his true name. He revealed his identity. He wanted the story to be his. He wanted the victory to echo. And in that echo, he created a god's wrath. Polyphemus screamed toward the sky and the sea, calling on Poseidon to curse the man who blinded him. He asked that Odysseus never reach home, or if he did, that he arrive broken, alone, late, and miserable. Poseidon heard, not like a distant storm hearing a rumor, like a father hearing the pain in his child's voice. And Poseidon decided something that shaped one of the most famous journeys in human myth. Odysseus would pay. Not quickly, not cleanly. Poseidon does not punish like Zeus. Zeus strikes and ends it. Poseidon punishes like the sea. By delay, by exhaustion, by erosion, by grinding hope into salt. Odysseus' voyage home became a war against a god's mood. Storms rose at the wrong time. Currents turned against him. Ships shattered. Men died. Islands became traps. Detours became years. It was not only physical suffering. It was psychological punishment. Because nothing breaks a man like uncertainty. A lightning strike is terrifying, but it is immediate. You see it. It ends quickly. Poseidon's punishment is a horizon that never gets closer. A coastline that appears and disappears like a cruel mirage. A home that stays just out of reach for a decade. Odysseus struggled through monsters and temptations. Circe, the sirens, Scylla and Charybdis, Calypso's island, where a goddess offers comfort and immortality if he will abandon his quest. But beneath every danger is the same pressure. Poseidon's grudge. It is easy to forget how personal this is. Poseidon is not simply angry that a Cyclops was harmed. He is angry that a mortal thought he could win and boast. Poseidon is angry that cleverness tried to stand above consequence. Poseidon is angry because he recognizes himself in Odysseus, not in intelligence, but in pride. And Poseidon hates seeing his own flaw reflected in a mortal. So he turns the sea into a mirror that shows Odysseus, again and again, what he truly is. A man. A small creature daring to shout his name at an ocean. Now, Poseidon's pursuit of Odysseus also reveals something else. Poseidon is capable of focus. This is important because people imagine him as pure impulse, pure weather, pure shifting mood. But a long vendetta requires memory. It requires intention. It requires the ability to return to a target year after year without forgetting why. Poseidon has that ability. His mind, like the sea, can hold storms for a long time. The Odyssey, in many ways, is not only Odysseus' story. It is Poseidon's. It is the story of a god proving that the ocean does not forgive arrogance. Zeus eventually limits Poseidon's punishment, not because Zeus feels sympathy for Odysseus, but because the balance of divine politics matters. Odysseus is favored by Athena, and the conflict becomes not only a grudge but a contest between gods. Athena protects. Poseidon attacks. A mind god against a sea god. Strategy against force. This rivalry echoes the older contest for Athens. Poseidon is not only punishing Odysseus. He is punishing Athena's taste. He is punishing the world's preference for cleverness over raw power. Because Poseidon believes the world is built on force, not on ideas. The sea cares nothing for your plan. The sea cares only for what you can survive. And Poseidon wants Odysseus to learn that truth in his lungs. Eventually, Odysseus reaches Ithaca. He arrives late. He arrives battered. He arrives disguised because even home has become a battlefield. The price Poseidon demanded is paid in time and trauma. Polyphemus' curse is fulfilled. Poseidon does not apologize. He does not need to. Gods do not ask permission to be themselves. This story becomes famous because it captures Poseidon's most dramatic quality. The sea is not evil. The sea is not good. The sea is consequence. Poseidon is consequence. Now, while Poseidon's grudge against Odysseus is the most famous, it is not the only time he inserted himself into human wars. The Trojan War is another stage where Poseidon's complexity appears. Poseidon does not always oppose the same side. He is not loyal to one nation. He is loyal to his own honor. He once helped build Troy's walls, and he was cheated. That betrayal never fully faded from his memory. Yet, during the Trojan War, he sometimes aids the Greeks, sometimes opposes them, depending on the shifting politics of the gods and the insults of mortals. This is what mortals call inconsistency. But it is not inconsistency. It is a god's version of diplomacy and ego. Poseidon is not bound by human ideologies. He is bound by pride, by alliances, by old debts, and by the constant need to be respected. When he helps, he expects recognition. When he is denied, he punishes. This is his pattern. This is why his worship is full of anxiety. Now Poseidon's reputation among mortals becomes clear. He is the god you cannot ignore. He is the god you do not trust to stay calm. He is the god you fear, even when you need him. He is the ocean's face, and the ocean does not care that you have a family waiting at home. That indifference is not cruelty. It is nature. But Poseidon is not only nature. He is personality. And personality makes nature feel like judgment. This is why sailors spoke his name like they were negotiating with a king rather than observing a weather pattern. Poseidon encouraged that belief, because belief is power. And Poseidon, more than most, loved to feel power as worship. Yet even as he enjoyed worship, Poseidon could not escape the god's internal politics. Zeus remained king. Athena remained admired. Apollo remained radiant. Hades remained necessary. Poseidon remained essential. But essential does not always translate into central. That subtle displacement, the feeling of being important but not beloved, fueled his insecurity again. And insecurity leads Poseidon back to the same behaviors. More demonstrations. More dominance. More lovers. More children. More wars. Because when Poseidon cannot be certain of his place, he makes the world feel his weight. But weight creates cracks, and cracks create enemies. In the next chapter, Poseidon's rivalry with Athena and his ongoing conflict with human civilization's direction will deepen. Because as mortals begin to build empires and cities, they begin to treat the sea as a road rather than as a god. They begin to sail as if they own the water. And Poseidon does not tolerate ownership without tribute. Chapter 5. Cities, horses, and the unstable heart of a king. If Zeus is the god of the sky's authority, and Hades the god of the underworld's permanence, then Poseidon is the god of boundaries that refuse to stay still. The shoreline is never fixed. The sea takes and gives. It erodes cliffs and deposits sand. It draws maps and then erases them. It teaches a lesson no empire wants to learn. Nothing you build is permanent. Civilization hates that lesson. So civilization made a deal with Poseidon. Not a written contract, but a repeating ritual. We will honor you, and you will allow our ships to pass. This is why Poseidon's worship became a religion of transactions. Offerings before voyages, bulls at the water's edge, temples at harbors, festivals that gave him attention the way a king expects attention. But transactions have a weakness. They create the illusion that the god is a merchant. And once humans think they can purchase safety, they grow arrogant. They stop feeling awe. They start feeling entitlement. This is when Poseidon becomes violent. Because Poseidon hates entitlement more than he hates fear. Fear is honest. Entitlement is an insult. You can see this dynamic in the myths where cities reject him. Athens is the famous example. Poseidon offered a spring and lost to Athena's olive tree. It was not merely a lost contest. It was a verdict on what kind of civilization humans preferred. They preferred planning over force. They preferred stability over wildness. They preferred the olive's patient gift over the sea's unpredictable power. Poseidon took that personally. He punished Athens in some tellings, and even in those where he does not. The rejection becomes a scar in the relationship between the sea god and the city that would later claim to be the height of human reason. Poseidon's rivalry with Athena is not a petty fight between gods. It is a symbolic war. Athena represents craft, strategy, civilization's spine. Poseidon represents nature's refusal to be mastered. Every time humans choose Athena's gift, Poseidon feels the world turn slightly against him. And Poseidon refuses to accept being made secondary. So he asserts himself. He does not always assert himself with storms. Sometimes he asserts himself with creation. The horse is one of his strangest gifts. Many traditions connect Poseidon to horses, to their wildness, to their strength, to their speed. Some myths say he created the first horse. Others say he is patron of horse taming, chariots, and the violent elegance of cavalry. This seems contradictory until you remember what Poseidon is. A horse is power made mobile. A horse is a storm with legs. A horse can be trained, but never fully domesticated. There is always a moment in the animal's eye where you see the wildness still breathing beneath the obedience. That is Poseidon. So when Poseidon offers horses, he is offering civilization a deal. You can borrow my power if you respect it. But if you treat it like property, it will throw you. This is why Poseidon is honored in games and athletic contests. The Isthmian Games, among others, celebrate him with proof of strength, speed, and discipline. A city can honor Poseidon not only by begging for safe voyages, but by showing him the kind of bodies and wills that resemble his own force. Poseidon loved that kind of worship, because it did not feel like pleading. It felt like recognition, and recognition was what he craved most. Yet his craving did not make him stable. Poseidon's emotional world is like his realm. It is deep. It is unpredictable. It can be calm for months and then erupt into violence with no warning. This instability shaped his marriage. Amphitrite, his queen, is often treated as a background figure in popular retellings, but a queen of the sea cannot be a weak presence. Amphitrite is not a mortal spouse who depends on a husband's mood. She is a goddess of the deep, older than many human prayers, and her authority is real. But even a strong queen can be wounded by a king's appetite. Poseidon's affairs were endless. Sometimes they were disguised as romance, sometimes as conquest, sometimes as divine inevitability. Amphitrite's position in myth remains, but the emotional reality of such a marriage is implied. The sea's king is faithful to nothing but his nature. This is where Poseidon's love stories become a landscape of consequences. He fathers children who become kings and heroes, and they often inherit his instability. Some inherit his courage and become great. Some inherit his pride and become dangerous. Some inherit his wildness and become monstrous. That is Poseidon's legacy. He does not create quiet lives. He creates stories that demand songs and blood. Consider the Minotaur. In one of the most famous chains of events in myth, Poseidon gives King Minos a magnificent bull, a sign of divine favor and a demand for sacrifice. Minos is supposed to sacrifice the bull to Poseidon as tribute. Minos refuses. He keeps the bull because he wants the gift without paying the cost. That single act contains the human flaw Poseidon hates most: entitlement. So Poseidon punishes. And the punishment is not a simple storm. It is a curse that twists desire into horror. Minos' wife, Pasiphae, is driven into unnatural passion for the bull. She mates with it through an invention of Daedalus. From that union comes the Minotaur, a creature with a man's body and a bull's head, a monster born from divine wrath and human arrogance. The Minotaur becomes a national shame, a labyrinth secret, a living proof that gods do not tolerate cheating. This story is often told as tragedy and horror, but beneath it is a lesson Poseidon keeps repeating. If you do not honor the sea will enter your house in a form you cannot control. And even when Poseidon is not directly punishing, his influence shapes other tragedies. Theseus, a hero connected to Poseidon, becomes a king who achieves greatness and leaves emotional wreckage. His life is full of victories and mistakes, love and abandonment, pride and consequences. His story mirrors the sea's nature. It delivers you to new shores and then demands a toll. Poseidon's gifts always demand a toll. Horses demand mastery and risk. Seas demand sacrifice and humility. Favor demands respect. If respect is not given, the toll becomes pain. Now, as cities grew, another conflict sharpened. The sea became a road. Humans began to sail farther. They mapped coastlines. They named islands. They began to behave as if understanding a current meant owning it. This is the beginning of a dangerous human belief. That knowledge replaces reverence. Poseidon despised this belief, because to Poseidon, knowledge without humility is simply a new form of arrogance. A sailor who knows the stars but laughs at the gods is still a sailor floating on Poseidon's mood. Poseidon did not have to prove that often. He only had to prove it once per generation. A sudden storm, a ship swallowed, a harbor ruined, a city flooded, and the world would remember briefly to respect the sea. But respect gained through fear does not last. Fear fades as soon as the sun returns. So Poseidon remained trapped in a cycle of punishment and worship, of offerings and arrogance, of gratitude and entitlement. This cycle made him restless. Restlessness in a god becomes ambition. Ambition becomes rivalry. Rivalry becomes conflict. And Poseidon's greatest rivalry was always, in one way or another, with Zeus. Not because he wanted the sky, but because he hated the idea that any crown could be higher than his. In the story of the conspiracy against Zeus, Poseidon dared to bind his brother, to restrain the king of gods. That act reveals Poseidon's deepest desire, not to govern politely, to be unchallengeable, to never be swallowed again by anyone's authority. But the attempt failed. Zeus endured. Poseidon was punished and humiliated. That humiliation did not diminish him. It made him more sensitive, more aggressive, more likely to lash out at mortals who resembled Zeus in one important way. Mortals who believed power gave them the right to take without pain. This is why Poseidon becomes, in so many myths, a punisher of kings. Because kings are the mortal version of gods. And Poseidon cannot stand the sight of arrogance wearing a crown. In the next chapter, Poseidon's role in wars and in divine politics will deepen. We will see him as ally and enemy, protector and destroyer, a god whose temper becomes a geopolitical event. And we will see the way his children and lovers carry his chaos into the mortal world, creating bloodlines that shape history. Because Poseidon's story is not only about the sea, it is about what happens when power refuses to be healed. Chapter 6. The War God of Water. The ally who could turn, the brother who would not kneel. Poseidon is often remembered for storms, lovers, and grudges, but there is another side to him that sits behind all of that like a dark current beneath a calm surface. He is a god of war. Not war in the way Ares is war, loud and hungry for blood. Poseidon is war in the way oceans are war. Slow to announce, violent when it arrives, capable of swallowing armies and leaving no monument behind. This is why Poseidon's presence in human conflicts matters so much. When he interferes, the battlefield expands beyond spears and shields. It becomes weather. It becomes the ground itself shifting beneath men's feet. It becomes a coastline that suddenly betrays a fleet. The Trojan War is the clearest stage for this side of Poseidon. Troy stood as a city of walls and pride, and those walls carried Poseidon's fingerprint. In earlier days, Poseidon and Apollo built Troy's fortifications for King Laomedon. This was not a friendly favor. It was a divine labor forced by Zeus's punishment in some traditions, a humiliation for gods who were not accustomed to serving mortals. When the walls were complete, Laomedon refused to pay. He treated gods like tools. He cheated. Poseidon never forgot. This is a rule in Poseidon's nature. He can move on from desire. He can move on from distraction. He cannot move on from disrespect. So Poseidon punished Troy with a sea monster, and the city learned that cheating divine power creates divine consequences. The monster was not merely a creature. It was Poseidon's message made flesh. You do not take from me without pain. But when the Trojan War arrives later, Poseidon's role is not simple revenge. Because Poseidon is not loyal to a flag. He is loyal to honor and to the shifting alliances of Olympus. Sometimes he supports the Greeks, because their cause aligns with his old grudges and because their enemies have offended him. Sometimes he opposes them, because their arrogance is familiar and disgusting. Sometimes he is restrained by Zeus, because Zeus needs balance among the gods to prevent divine civil war. This is why Poseidon appears inconsistent to mortals. They want gods to be predictable. Poseidon is not predictable. He is political. And politics in a god is always tied to ego. In some tellings, Poseidon aids the Greeks directly. He saves heroes from death. He shakes the battlefield. He draws the sea's force into the war and makes the Trojans fear not only Greek spears but the earth itself. In other moments, his support is indirect. A wave at the wrong time. A mist that confuses, a sudden tremor that breaks formation, divine influence that mortals interpret as luck. Poseidon likes being interpreted as luck, because luck makes mortals feel small, and Poseidon enjoys making mortals feel small when they forget what they owe. But Poseidon's relationship with Zeus hangs over every war. Zeus is the king, and Poseidon's pride has always strained under that hierarchy. There is a quiet truth in the myths that modern retellings often ignore. Poseidon is powerful enough to threaten Zeus, not in a quick strike, but in a structural way. The sea touches everything: trade, travel, empire, survival, dodge. If Poseidon wanted to destroy the human world, he could. If he wanted to make worship collapse by drowning cities and starving ports, he could. Zeus knows this. This is why Zeus does not treat Poseidon like a minor god. He treats him like a dangerous brother who must be managed. Management becomes insults. Insults become resentments. Resentments become conspiracies. The conspiracy against Zeus is one of the most revealing moments of Poseidon's inner life. Poseidon, Hera, and Athena, and sometimes others depending on the telling, bind Zeus. They attempt to restrain him. They attempt, perhaps, to correct his tyranny, perhaps to seize power for themselves. What matters is that Poseidon participates. He dares to place hands on the king of gods. That is not a moment of simple rebellion. That is a confession. Poseidon does not accept Zeus's supremacy in his heart. He may obey at times. He does not kneel emotionally. The plot fails. Zeus is freed. Poseidon is punished. In some traditions, he is forced into labor among mortals again, building walls, serving, tasting humiliation. This punishment does not break him. It sharpens him. Poseidon returns to the sea with an even deeper conviction that hierarchy is intolerable. But he also returns with a practical lesson. Zeus cannot be removed easily. So Poseidon does what many powerful men do when they cannot take the highest throne. He becomes a king in his own realm who demands absolute respect, and he takes his frustrations out on smaller figures. This is one source of his cruelty. It is not only nature. It is psychology. Poseidon is the brother who wanted to be equal, perhaps greater, and learned that equality among gods is always compromised by politics. So he becomes fiercely territorial. In his realm, there are no votes. There is no debate. There is Poseidon. This is why his punishments often feel excessive. It is not only about the crime. It is about his need to be feared. Feared means safe. Feared means never swallowed again. Now, Poseidon's warlike nature also manifests in his children. He produces heroes who become warriors and kings. He produces monsters that become threats. He produces bloodlines that carry conflict into the human world for generations. When Poseidon fathers a child, the child is rarely quiet. The child is usually a storm with a name. This is not always a blessing. Sometimes it is a curse. And because Poseidon's love life is vast, his influence becomes everywhere. The sea god is not only a distant divine force. He is present in lineages, present in royal houses, present in rivalries between cities that trace their legitimacy to divine ancestry. This is how gods shape history, not by ruling directly, by seeding the world with consequences. Poseidon also becomes a patron of certain heroes, But his patronage is never unconditional. He favors those who honor him. He punishes those who mock him. He rescues those who pray properly. He abandons those who assume entitlement. This creates a harsh worldview among his worshippers. The sea does not care about your morality. It cares about your respect. This is why Poseidon's morality is difficult to place into human categories. He can save a ship full of strangers and then destroy a city that offended him. He can bless a king with horses and then curse that king's house with monstrosity. He can be tender in a moment and brutal for a decade. He does not see these as contradictions. He sees them as expressions of the same principle. The sea gives and takes. Now, while Poseidon is shaping wars and destinies above, something else is happening beneath. His brother Hades is ruling the underworld with grim stability. Zeus is ruling the sky with thunderous authority. Poseidon watches them both. He watches Zeus receive worship with open festivals. He watches Hades receive fear and obedience. He watches himself receive nervous sacrifices and prayers spoken with trembling respect. Poseidon wants more than fear. He wants admiration. He wants the world to feel awe the way sailors feel awe when the ocean opens around them like an endless mouth. But admiration is harder to maintain than fear. Fear is simple. Admiration requires consistency, justice, a story people want to tell. Poseidon's story is not a story mortals want to tell as comfort. It is a story mortals tell as warning. So Poseidon's dissatisfaction grows. And when dissatisfaction grows in a god, it seeks an outlet. For Poseidon, the outlet is always the same. Demonstration, a quake, a flood, a storm, a new lover, a new child, a new punishment, movement. Because when Poseidon stops moving, he risks hearing the silence he lived in inside Kronos. He risks remembering what it felt like to be held. So he keeps the world in motion, even when that motion becomes destruction. In the next chapter, Poseidon's later mythic life narrows toward a kind of maturity that is not softness, but exhaustion. We will see him confronted by the limits even a sea god cannot break. The rise of new eras, new faiths, new philosophies that treat gods as symbols rather than rulers. And we will see how a god who craves reverence reacts when the world begins to outgrow old fears. Chapter 7. The Slow Dimming of Worship, and the King Who Could Not Be Forgotten. There is a moment every immortal power eventually faces. Not a battle. Not a rebellion. Not a hero with a sword. A change in attention. Mortals evolve. Cities rise and fall. Empires burn and rebuild. Languages shift. Rituals become habits and then become memories. The gods do not die the way mortals die, but they can become something else. They can become less believed, less feared, less needed. Poseidon, more than many gods, was sensitive to this, because his existence in the mortal mind depended on a single fragile thing: reverence. Not just belief, but reverence that includes fear. When mortals stop fearing, they begin to treat the sea like a road. And when they treat the sea like a road, Poseidon becomes an inconvenience. This change does not happen overnight. It happens the way erosion happens, grain by grain, generation by generation. Sailors become more skilled. Ships become stronger. Navigation becomes science rather than prayer. People still offer sacrifices, but fewer do it from the core of their gut. More do it from tradition, the way you repeat a gesture because your grandmother did. Poseidon feels that difference. A god can taste sincerity the way sharks taste blood. So Poseidon reacts in the way he always reacts to diminishing respect. He reminds the world that it is still small. Storms rise in unexpected seasons. Harbors that thought themselves safe are broken. Earthquakes crack city walls. Tsunamis pull land into water as if the shoreline was a loose cloth. Mortals interpret these disasters in different ways depending on the age. Some call it divine anger. Some call it fate. Some call it nature. Some call it chance. Poseidon does not care what word they use. He cares that they remember to tremble, because trembling is the oldest form of worship. This creates a deeper paradox in Poseidon's character. He wants admiration, but he produces fear. He wants love, but he creates trauma. He wants recognition, but he earns it through punishment. Poseidon cannot easily change that. He is not a god built for teaching gentle lessons. He teaches by impact. Now, as mortals begin to shift toward new eras, Poseidon's relationships with other gods also shift. Zeus remains king in mythic memory, but kingship becomes less relevant when mortals stop seeing gods as rulers and start seeing them as stories. Athena becomes an ideal. Apollo becomes art sura. Aphrodite becomes desire. Hades becomes a metaphor for death. Poseidon becomes the ocean's personality in a poem. To a god like Poseidon, being reduced to poetry is a kind of insult. He wants to be felt, not interpreted, so he becomes more extreme. But the more extreme he becomes, the more mortals look for other explanations. They build structures. They create engineering. They build breakwaters and harbors and seawalls. They develop systems that reduce the ocean's unpredictability. Every system mortals build to tame the sea is a quiet argument against Poseidon. And Poseidon hates arguments. He prefers obedience. Yet, for all his rage, Poseidon also faces the truth that even gods have limits. He cannot control every current at once, because the sea is enormous. He cannot watch every ship. He cannot prevent every storm from rising or force every storm to obey his mood, because the cosmos itself has patterns older than his personal desire. Poseidon is powerful. He is not omnipotent. This limitation creates something new in him, not humility. Exhaustion. Exhaustion is different. Humility is chosen. Exhaustion is forced by time. Over ages, Poseidon witnesses endless cycles. Cities that worship him vanish. Islands that honor him sink. Dynasties that swear by his name are erased. He sees how quickly mortals replace gods with new ideas. And because Poseidon's core wound is being ignored, this evolution of the world is painful to him in a way Zeus can hide behind authority and Hades can endure behind necessity. Poseidon craves attention. When an attention fades, he suffers. So he lashes out again, and again, and again. But lashing out does not produce lasting devotion. It produces temporary fear, and temporary fear fades. This is how Poseidon becomes trapped. He is the god of a realm that humans can never fully control, and yet humans always try. He is the god of storms, and humans build better ships. He is the god of earthquakes, and humans build stronger foundations. He is the god of the sea's mood, and humans learn to predict weather. Prediction is a form of defiance. Not because prediction removes the sea's power, but because it removes the mystery that turns fear into worship. Poseidon sees prediction and feels robbed, as if mortals have stolen a part of his crown. This is why he becomes, in later imagination, more monstrous than regal. He is turned into the archetype of rage, the ocean's tantrum, the god who cannot accept change. That portrayal is unfair, but it is not invented from nothing. Now, Poseidon's personal life does not soften with age either. His many lovers, his many children, create a scattered legacy. Some of his descendants become noble, some become cruel, some become tragic. His bloodline spreads through the mortal world like salt water seeping into stone. This means Poseidon's influence never truly disappears. Even when worship fades, his offspring remain in stories. Their victories and failures become part of cultural memory. And then there is the sea itself. The sea does not go away. It remains the greatest constant in the mortal world. Empires may vanish, but the ocean continues to touch every shore. Ships still sink. Fishermen still pray when storms rise. People still fear drowning. People still fear the ground shaking. So even in eras where gods are treated as legends, Poseidon remains closer to reality than most. Because every wave is a reminder. This is why Poseidon is one of the hardest gods to fully forget. You can stop believing in Zeus's lightning as a divine message and call it weather. But when the ocean opens and swallows a ship, the old fear returns instinctively. In that fear, Poseidon survives, not as a king on a throne, as a sensation in the human body. Now, does Poseidon have an ending? In Greek myth, the Olympian gods do not die in the mortal sense. They are immortal. They fade in worship, they change in meaning, but they do not have a final breath the way heroes do. So Poseidon's story does not end with a death scene. It ends with transformation. He becomes less a character and more a force. Less a ruler with a palace and more a name people whisper when the sea turns dark. And in some later mystical and philosophical strands, the gods become aspects of nature and psyche, and Poseidon becomes the symbol of emotion, depth, anger, desire, the unconscious moving beneath the surface. This is a kind of afterlife for a god, not glorious, but persistent. Yet even if the world changes, Poseidon remains Poseidon in the core of his myth. He's the swallowed child who became the roar. He's the brother who would not accept being second without consequence. He is the king who demands tribute from sailors and kings alike. He is the builder who can raise walls and also break them. He is the lover whose appetite creates both heroes and monsters. He is the punisher who makes arrogance pay in salt and time. And beneath all of those titles, he is the ocean's truth. That beauty and terror are the same water. That calm is never a guarantee. That the surface is always lying about what moves beneath it. Poseidon cannot be civilized out of existence. Because as long as humans have bodies that can drown, as long as they have lungs that panic when water fills them, as long as they have cities built near coasts, Poseidon's name remains a shadow in their thoughts. He may not be worshipped in every era, but he is always present, like a distant storm on a horizon that never truly clears. Chapter 8. The sea that outlives names, and the king who remains. If you search for Poseidon's death, you will find only silence. That is not an omission. It is the nature of the Olympians. Heroes die. Monsters die. Cities die. Dynasties die. Pentual be baden zondia. Denu hell, see a rashter border, totide, soon and. But gods, in the old Greek imagination, do not end. They endure. They change shape in the human mind, but they do not vanish the way a mortal vanishes. Poseidon does not receive a final scene where he closes his eyes, releases his trident, and disappears into darkness. That kind of ending belongs to creatures who are allowed to be finite. Poseidon is not finite. So, the proper end for Poseidon is not a deathbed. It is a final portrait, a last wide shot, a horizon. Poseidon's life is a long argument with the universe about one core issue: control. Kronos tried to control the future by swallowing it. Poseidon lived inside that control and swore he would never be contained again. He fought in the Titan War like a god who needed to break the idea of confinement itself. He claimed the sea because the sea cannot be swallowed. He ruled it like a king who believed that if he could command the ocean, nothing could command him. But control is a hunger that never stays satisfied. Because control is not the same as healing. Poseidon built palaces. He fathered heroes. He punished kings. He sent storms as signatures. He shook the earth beneath cities that forgot to honor him. He competed with Athena for human admiration and lost, and he never fully forgave the world for preferring the olive to the wave. He lived as if reverence could repair the wound of being swallowed. It could not. Reverence can make you feel powerful. It cannot make you feel safe inside your own mind. And so Poseidon's story becomes a tragedy of power. Not because he is weak, but because he is too strong to be forced into change. He continues being Poseidon even when being Poseidon causes damage. This is why he is feared. It is also why he is respected. A god who can be reasoned with is comforting. A god who cannot be reasoned with is real. Now, consider his moral shape. Poseidon is not a clean hero. He saves sailors and destroys fleets. He blesses cities and curses bloodlines. He creates horses and creates monsters. He loves and violates. He honors and humiliates. He is not the god of justice. He is the god of consequence. And consequence is not fair in the way humans want fairness to be. Consequence is simply what follows. The sea does not care if you are noble or cruel. It cares if you are prepared. Poseidon mirrors that indifference with personality. He is not indifferent emotionally. He is capable of rage, jealousy, pride, desire, and spite. But he is indifferent morally in the way nature is indifferent. He does not ask whether a ship is full of good men or bad men when a storm takes it. He asks whether the world remembered to respect him today. That is his flaw. That is also his cosmic function. Because without gods like Poseidon, mortals would believe they are masters of everything. They are not. Poseidon exists in mythic psychology to keep humans humble, not gently, violently. Now, when the world begins to move away from old worship, Poseidon does not become powerless. He becomes something else, a symbol, a force, a name that means ocean, a name that means depth, a name that means the anger beneath calm faces, a name that means desire that cannot be restrained. In that transformation, Poseidon gains a different kind of immortality. He enters language. He enters art. He enters the fear that returns when a coastal city watches the sea pull back unnaturally, and everyone suddenly understands what a wave can do. Poseidon does not need temples to exist. He needs water, and water is everywhere. This is why Poseidon remains one of the most persistent divine figures in the human imagination, because the sea remains. Now, if we speak of Poseidon's successes, we must speak with clarity. He survived Kronos. He helped overthrow the Titans. He secured a domain that touches every shore. He became indispensable to trade, travel, and the survival of empires. He built and broke cities by shifting the sea and the earth. He fathered bloodlines that shaped heroic ages. He maintained influence even when worship thinned, because humans can never fully stop fearing the ocean. Those are successes, but his failures are equally clear. He let his pride become a weapon that harmed innocence. He turned rejection into punishment too often. He pursued desire without consent in many tellings, leaving stains that no amount of power can erase. He held grudges long enough to become cruel. He tried to bind Zeus and failed, proving that even a sea god can be humiliated, and the humiliation deepened his insecurity rather than curing it. He could not accept being second without making someone pay for it. Those are failures. And in the balance between those successes and failures, Poseidon becomes what he always was. A god who embodies the ocean's truth. That the same water that gives life can also take it. That beauty and terror are not opposites but neighbors. That calm is never a promise. That control is always an illusion if you believe you can have it forever. Poseidon's final portrait is not a funeral. It is a scene. Oh, coastline at dusk. The sky dimming. The sea breathing in and out with slow certainty. A ship on the horizon looking small. A city behind it trusting its walls, not knowing how quickly walls become rubble when the earth shakes. And somewhere in that scene, unseen but felt, a presence. Not a man with a beard and a crown, not an idol in a temple, but a force with memory. The swallowed child who became the roar. The brother who refused to kneel. The king who demands tribute from every sailor who dares to cross his realm. He remains. He remains in storms. He remains in the ground's sudden trembling. He remains in the fear that tightens a throat when waves grow tall. He remains in the human mind whenever emotion rises like water and threatens to overflow reason. Poseidon does not end. He recedes and returns. Like the tide,